Welcome to Secret Ops, the podcast uncovering the world of business operations, one episode at a time. I'm your host, Ariana Cafone, and today's guest is James Mazza, Chief of Emergency Medical Services for Montclair Ambulance Unit in Montclair, New Jersey. James, welcome to Secret Ops. When you reached out to say that you'd be willing to speak on this podcast, I was beyond thrilled. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I actually reached out sort of almost as a joke. I was like, oh, yeah, let me know when you want to do that, to hear about our world of operations. And you were like, okay, let's do it. I was like, all right, I guess we're doing this.
I mean, if you open the door, I'm going to step right in because, I've always been fascinated with your interest in this. I mean, we've known each other for 7-8 years now.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible the work that you do. I could personally never do it. And I am really excited to give others a peek into your world because I don't think most people really know of somebody or do the work themselves. But let's start a little bit back. So where you are today, how the heck did you get there? Where did you find your path to what you're doing today?
It was a lot of trial and error. I have always worked 2 jobs from like high school on. And when I hit 18, 19, I had no idea what I wanted to do in this world. I was like, all right, I got a scholarship to college to do international relations and diplomacy. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll work for Homeland Security or something like that. That whole post 9/11 mindset. And I saw EMS as a stepping stone to law enforcement because, okay, it's something that is related to public safety, gives you like that touch of what they go through, but it's not law enforcement. So at 19, I started volunteering with the Nutley Volunteer Emergency and Rescue Squad and worked other jobs in between. And then, there was a clip there for 5 years. I worked full-time on an ambulance transport company nights and weekends, but I'd pull myself out of EMS because it doesn't really pay the bills. Unfortunately, it doesn't get the funding it deserves. So I wound up working either, at Baron Fig for over a year as one of the first employees, or at an IT company, or even at a gun range. And I just kept getting drawn back into EMS because it was just something that really called to me. It made me go to nursing school, but healthcare just called to me, particularly emergency healthcare.
Now, for me, I'm like, that would not call to me at all. That is scary to me. What do you think about it calls to you? Like, what do you think it is that the act of helping people in the intensity of an emergency sort of situation where the stakes are really high, a combination of those things?
It's definitely a combination of those things. And there's plenty of people out there who will tell you that they don't get the rush and excitement from going on call anymore because they're burnt out, right? But if we weren't as burnt out as we were, even still today, if I'm in a vehicle that I'm driving lights and sirens, there's a small touch of excitement. There's a little adrenaline hit there. It's knowing that I can help people at their worst possible time. I always knew I was able to talk to anyone of any different type of educational background, anything else. And 90% of what we do in EMS is really talking to people and either convincing them to go to the hospital or talking through their ailment or trying to dissect where, what their situation is. And I say that EMS being basic life support, which is what I am. I'm an EMT. There are advanced life support that's a little bit more diagnostic, right? They can do EKGs and interpret the EKGs and provide different medications. But when it comes to basic life support, it's very rudimentary bandaging, medicine, and package them up, take them to the hospital, and kind of talk them through that.
So when you started volunteering at 19, you said, what was that first instance like, or that first week like, just getting used to what this world is?
The first week, we picked up an old man who had fallen on the ground and was wearing no pants. And that was my very first call, my only call. So that was an interesting experience.
That was a welcome to the world.
That was a welcome to the world, right? And we took him to the hospital, and then there was nothing. And then my second week, we had it was mid-40s cardiac arrest victim who we could not successfully resuscitate, and she wound up being transported to the hospital and passing at the hospital. And that hit me. It hit me a little bit, and then some people in the field used a little bit of what we call gallows or dark humor, and made me realize we did everything we could, and you can't save them all. In fact, you only, for a cardiac arrest victim, even if it's witnessed, you're only saving about 10% in the field. So,
wow.
And that's witnessed.
10%. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That is heavy. I will say, Joey, my husband, always said that when you would come in and tell the stories, that it was captivating. Like it was, I think because you just got a peek at life in a way that no one at 19 would ever get to see life for the most part, unless you were served some unfortunate circumstances. Now, if we zoom into today, so you've been doing this work over a decade, 15 years?
Yeah, this year is like 15, 16, something like that. I started 2006. So yeah.
Wow. We've talked about how you got into this line of work, but I want to talk about your day-to-day life. So what does that look like? What is James Mazza's day when he wakes up and he gets to work?
Well, it kind of starts when I first wake up. I go through my emails on my phone because, 2022, you can't be not connected to everything that's going on all the time. That's assuming that somebody didn't call me in the middle of the night. So we have 4 supervisors, myself being one of them, that our staff will call in case there's a situation like, hey, I accidentally backed the truck into a pole. There's no real damage, but it happened. Or, hey, can we go to this hospital? And some of those calls are legitimate, and some of them probably could have been an email. But we'll get to work, and typically there's already a pot of coffee brewing because you can't do anything without coffee.
Of course not.
And when we say coffee, it's like a 12 cup pot with like 8 heaping scoops. Like, this is hard, strong coffee. The one guy tried to make coffee and was just like, this is like tea. We can't drink this. And then the day kind of devolves from what emails came up or what I've got going on. So our executive director recently left. So now, on top of scheduling and logistical planning and trying to find funding for a new ambulance, I'm now also doing payroll entry, all of our fundraising donations that come in. I have to catalog them into our program and make sure that they're deposited, and we send a thank you note out. It's a little bit of everything. Like for us operations, my day is kind of chained to a desk as opposed to driving an ambulance. I drive a desk, and I have like 35 kids now that in all different ways, shape, or form come to me with their personal or professional problems or concerns or ideas, or I have to discipline people because they're not completing charts in time, or it runs the gambit of anything you could think of might happen, just with the added piece of what we do may affect somebody's life in a way that other companies don't do, right?
Totally. The stakes are just always at a higher level than in most situations, because you're most of the time talking about somebody's life in some of the ways that you're operating. So I guess this is a question I like to ask everybody, because I'm just really curious on the approach to operations within emergency medical services, particularly. So I think there's 2 different ways where you can approach operations through a problem first mindset. So, something shit hits the fan, you've got to navigate it. And that's where you sort of pinpoint your operational strategy and go from there. Or there's the opportunity mindset. So this allows you to kind of look for opportunities that you can do different things or be able to develop operations differently. Between an opportunity mindset and a problem first mindset, my guess is that you're leaning more towards problem first, just because you have a lot thrown at you on a day-to-day basis that is emergencies. But is that true? Is it more problem first or opportunity?
It's probably, at least for me, an organization, probably a 70-30 split, problem first versus opportunity. We definitely try and seize whatever opportunity we can to work for us. And I say that we got a grant for the whole inside of our building to be refurbished. We're in we're in an old firehouse that was built in 1906, and
wow,
we moved in like 20-ish years ago. I don't know the exact date. I know I wasn't there yet, so that's why I don't know the exact date. But it hadn't been painted since we moved in, and it was well over 15 years ago. So Lowe's came in and did some funding, and we were able to get the whole inside painted and new flooring, which is great. But we had to all move out of our office like emergently one day because the project it's like, oh, by the way, we're going to start here today. It's like, well, you are. So we happen to have a trailer, which is to be used for large scale incidents. So we activated what we call our continuity of operations plan, which is we work out of the trailer. So we moved all of our office stuff into the trailer, hooked up phone lines in the trailer, had the generator running, and worked out of the trailer for about 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's so funny because I've written up, business continuity plans, emergency response plans. I've never had to use one. And I love that you had to use it in the case of a remodel. It's always how it goes.
Yeah. But it was good exercise like that. And that's where I think the opportunity comes from. Like, it was a crisis and we had to kind of just like deal with it in the moment, but we also saw the opportunity. Like, we're not just dealing with it in the moment. We're going to exercise the plan and see what works. And we discovered that after 3 weeks of intensive usage on the generator, it kind of needs to be serviced because after the end of the third week, it just was like, all right, we're done.
That's actually a very good point, though. Like, how often are you implementing these things and doing these trial runs? But how important could that be in an entirely different situation? Like 10 out of 10 important. So thank you, Lowe's, for remodeling and pausing it. So before I go into the next phase, I just have a question that's like maybe a little kid Ariana question, but like, what is it like to drive an ambulance? Tell us.
Mildly exciting, a little terrifying, kind of lame in the sense that you're basically driving a box on wheels, right? Like it's not aerodynamic. It doesn't take turns great. It's a big beefy vehicle, and then nobody stops for you. So you're going lights and sirens. You come to a red light, nobody stops. You've got family members trying to follow you to the hospital that we tell, hey, don't follow us through a red light because they're not going to stop for me. They're really not going to stop for you.
Oh, man.
So what's interesting, and there's a lot of data coming out, you're probably going to see over the next 5 years, you're already starting to see a lot of this among some agencies. You're not going to see ambulances going lights and sirens as much anymore, at least in non-urban settings. The data is showing that the amount of time saved going to the hospital, lights and sirens, is anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And once they're in the ambulance already, that's not, except in certain circumstances where it is, that's not going to make life or death situation. But the odds of getting into a car accident go up dramatically because the drivers, if they're younger and experienced, their adrenaline goes up. Even the older drivers, their adrenaline goes up.
I get sweaty every time I hear an ambulance. I'm like, pull over, I'm sweating.
and I don't even mean just the people on the road. I mean the person driving the ambulance too, right? Like we're trained, but it does change the dynamic. So the data is coming out. New Jersey's been rolling out a lot of like sterile cockpit. Hands on the wheel. Your passenger hits the siren, which we all are used to, like one hand at the top of the wheel, right hand down, hitting the siren, and they're trying to move us away from that and really move us to an idea where you're only using lights and sirens to go to the hospital if it's a true life-threatening emergency.
Wow.
The stuff that we do is, medicine and science driven. So as these studies come out, the field changes every couple of years.
Oh my God, that is fascinating and not what I expected from what it's like to drive an ambulance. This literally gets into, I think.
It's really cool though.
Okay, that's what I was expecting. But what I'm so glad that you sort of broke down for us there is one part of your job has so many different components that you're thinking about. You're thinking about, in this case, traffic, vehicles, emotional responses. When it comes to operations, the easiest way I've been able to dissect it across all different kinds of operations is it is made up of people, process, and technology. So I would love to dive into each of those just to, I guess, talk more about how you view that. So kicking off with, let's start with technology. What are some pieces of technology that you have to think about?
The biggest piece, obviously, is ambulances, right? They are not just a box on wheels, even though that's what I describe them as. They have different systems inside them, different control systems for the lights, the sirens. They also now have to have center mounts for the cots so that if the ambulance rolls over, the cot doesn't break free and harm the people in the back or the patient. And those center mount cots, those are actually what they call power loads. So the EMT doesn't have to hurt their back. You hook it in, press a button, and it kind of loads itself. It's saving the strain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But with stuff like that, you're looking at $50,000 an ambulance just for that whole setup.
Oh my gosh. What was when that came into being? Because we're thinking about like this is a whole different kind of layer of technology. This is, physical engineering. This is maybe in some cases robotics. What was it like using one of those for the first time?
It's interesting because you're not used to it where you just press a button and it lifts up. Our agency doesn't even have that technology yet. We have electric stretchers, which is still pretty easy, where you still have to hold the stretcher up and you can press a button and just lifts the legs and you push. But the newer stuff is even more advanced where you just hook it in, press a button, and the legs come up and it loads it just like all the weights on the system.
Wow. And that does change who then can work within this kind of line of work as well, too. Because I'm sure there's physical restrictions just based on what you're having to do on a daily basis. Yeah.
We come up with technological workarounds for stuff like that. So that's the ambulance's technology piece. Then, we do when I started, it was all paper charts. You go out with a clipboard and a piece, like one of those pieces of paper that you can.
Oh, the carbon copies?
The carbon copies, yeah.
I love those carbon copies.
Pink goes to the patient, yellow goes to the hospital, white goes with us. But now it's all computers. So now we have to have these tough books, which are rated to not break under the rigors that we do, but are constantly running into issues where, okay, this part of the keyboard's broken. Is it under warranty? Do we have to buy a new keyboard? You've got radios, which, you go on eBay and you look up a Motorola radio, you can find an old radio for like $1,200. Yeah. The brand new encrypted radios that the state of New Jersey has moved towards that allow the radio transmissions to remain private and access certain channels. Well, that's about $8,000 a pop.
Wow.
The technology we use just constantly is evolving. In certain cases, it is definitely predicated on medicine. So when I started, we used something called a backboard. And what a backboard is literally a board, or a spine board, there also could be called. It's a board you'd use to immobilize a person who's been in a traumatic injury, car accident, or a fall or something. It's like we want to immobilize their spine and keep their spine rigid so nothing hurts. That's when I started 15 years ago. Now it's like we don't use that anymore because we found that actually causes more spinal injury, because what would happen is they would go to the hospital, they'd be on this hard piece of plastic for 4 hours in the hospital, and now they're sitting there developing pressure ulcers or just new chronic back pain. So there was a study, I don't remember, this happened years ago, so I don't remember the specifics, but it was someplace in Arizona, and I think it was Singapore. They felt they were comparable in EMS responses. Arizona used backboard, Singapore did not, and in Singapore, the patients had better outcomes. So,
wow.
Next thing you know, we have to carry them because you might need them still for certain circumstances, but we don't use them anymore.
So, like when it comes to the technology, the tools that you have, you sort of have so much research that's going into these that's constantly evolving, constantly changing. A lot of these, the pricing is incredibly high. The funding isn't necessarily where it needs to be. I'm sure that creates a really stressful situation where you're trying to figure out where do we put our resources, what makes most sense moving forward. Do you work with other people in different towns or organizations to sort of collectively say, hey, this is the new standard of what we're doing? How does that work?
So a lot of these directives come out from the State Department of Health. So it's I want to call them unfunded mandates because that's what they are. That the state says this is how we have to do it, and we just have to figure it out. At Montclair Ambulance, we're trying to be very proactive with our partners in other neighboring communities, and really looking at the whole situation to say, look, 5 years from now, if we all want to be in existence, we need to change the way we operate. We're 100% paid pretty much in Montclair, but a lot of the agency around us are almost all volunteer. They have a harder time getting trucks out the door during the day or on weekend hours. Whereas they may get donations and they have money in the bank, they don't have the people. Whereas we have a harder time raising funds, but we have people, right? Mm-hmm. So we're trying to open those conversations up to those neighbors, and there's still resistance because it's New Jersey and everyone wants to kind of run their own little show. Nobody wants to discuss the idea of maybe we need to change the way we operate for the better. But I think we're making inroads, and I think long term we'll be successful in changing some of the minds of our neighbors out there. But when it comes to the ambulance, like technology, there is no standardization whatsoever. The state says you have to make sure it does X, and you'll have 10 different models of that thing that does X, and every agency uses something different.
Wow. That's a lot to manage and think about. Even just the maintenance, I'm like, oh my God, no, thank you. So I guess touching more on the process and the people standpoint, because a lot of it goes hand in hand, I guess people is intriguing me most next, because you've got people that you work with on your team. You've got people that you're working with that you're supporting on call when they're in a high emotional situation. I can guess that potentially the people side of your job is a lot of what you're managing on a day-to-day basis, potentially. But is that true? Are you finding that is a big part of it just because of what you're doing?
Definitely is a big part of it. I wish sometimes I had more time to sit back and look at the process and see, instead of putting out fires daily and not actual fires or not actually negative. I don't mean that in a negative context, like, oh my God, there's a crisis. It's not that it's a crisis, but it's the people dynamics. I'm working on the schedule for the month of December, and how many phone calls do I have to make to different people? Hey, I know you put this availability in, but can you do this? Or, it's November 15th, and I'm looking at the schedule I'm creating. I'm going to push out hopefully today or tomorrow. I don't have anyone as of today working Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve. Now that'll change because people want to pick up overtime and everything else, but it becomes almost like make a deal, right? Like, yes. And I've got a really good team. Like I said, I've got 35 people. I've got a deputy chief who's been at the organization for about 20 years. And I've got 2 supervisors, one of whom has also been at the organization for well over 15. He was actually my mentor when I was volunteering in Nutley Rescue and taught me everything I know.
Hello, fellow thinkers. Now, if you have been a loyal listener of Secret Ops, then you already know about our sponsors, Baron Fig, the company that makes tools for thinkers. Now, I'm totally biased, but I really think that Baron Fig has the best product suite for thinkers and operators alike. And you know what? I'm not the only one that thinks so. Bloomberg said, and I quote, that Baron Fig's products are, quote, high-end and well-crafted, which they absolutely are. Their Confidant notebook is the most delicious notebook that you will use with the most perfect dot grid paper. But it's not just Bloomberg. Actually, fun fact, New York Magazine, they tested 100 pens to find the top pen. And after testing all of those pens, they rated Baron Fig's Squire pen the number 1 pen. The number 1 pen. It's not just me, y'all. You got to give them a try. And guess what? We got you hooked up with the discount code. If you go to baronfig.com today, enter in the discount code SECRET20 and get 20% off your next order of $50 or more. Again, that's SECRET20 and get 20% off your next order of $50 or more. Oh, I'm so jealous that you're going to get to see all this for the first time because their products are so delicious. Anyway, enjoy, have fun. Let us know how you use the tools, and let's get back to the show.
We have a good core group. That's my two supervisors and deputy chief. And then the rest are just EMTs, right? Different levels of experience, been doing this different amount of time, all of them, all across the board. And each of them comes with their own set of great things and set of issues to be managed that, it's everyone wants to work the same hours. It's like, okay, I can't do that. Somebody's got to work the off hours. How are we going to make this work?
Yeah, I feel as somebody who has worked the holidays, I get it. That time and a half is amazing, but it is a negotiation, especially when I think about how many people are you working with? You said 30, was it 35?
35 or so,
there?
yeah. Of which maybe 20 to 23 are consistently actively working every week. I have some people who either, they're on a leave for whatever reason, or only are able to help out infrequently. And we make that work for historical reasons. But it's definitely interesting to deal with people in this way that I'm doing it. I've done that in the past. Like I rose up to the rank of assistant chief in Nutley Rescue, and I kind of had to do the same thing. I took over scheduling there when I was assistant chief, and that was a whole different dynamic there as well, because you had volunteers and paid staff. One of the things that I think helps us on the people side, it hurts us but helps us, is we're not a town entity. We're not a government entity. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. So we're accountable to our board of trustees. So it allows us to be a little bit, I don't want to say leaner, but there's no, outside the Department of Health and federal rules surrounding nonprofits, there's less government interaction than you might expect.
The red tape is different, and it allows you to kind of be more flexible with how you work and how you get the work done. I guess this dips into the process side of the operations, which is, we were talking about your emergency action plan, right? We're going to use this backup. How often, my curiosity is, if things are changing so frequently with how you need to respond to situations, how are you tracking those changes? How are you training people? That just seems like a lot to be able to kind of make sure that you're distilling.
So part of it is easy, and I say that because the state of New Jersey for an EMT requires, in order to stay certified, every 3 years you have to go through 24 elective credits and 24 required credits, or they I'm going to call them Core 13 because that's why I grew up with them. They've changed it to Core A, B, and C, but it's a Core 13 or your core of classes. And every 3 years you take these classes, and they tell you about any updates to the scope of practice for EMTs, any changes to the science or anything like that. So I don't have to worry about that piece of it, because if everyone has taken a recertification, they're properly certified, they should be up to speed on the changes that in healthcare that have occurred over the last 3 years.
Got it.
That being said, we do like to pride ourselves on the fact that we are a proactive organization. So some agencies will have a medical director who comes out of, say, Robert Wood Johnson or Atlantic Health or all these other different hospital systems that exist in New Jersey. We have a separate medical director who's been involved in EMS and is involved in different organizations. But he's very proactive to the point that the State Department of Health says EMTs can do X. He's going to write up a policy and a protocol and a procedure, and we will be doing X right away. Whereas some agencies are like, well, we want to evaluate and see if this is the right move. It's like, no, if the state is saying we can do it, we're going to do it. So not every agency in New Jersey does this, but we can administer albuterol treatments. We can administer aspirin for chest pain. Those are the ones that we can also do what's called CPAP, which everyone thinks about for the people at night when they're snoring, but also, if somebody has COPD or not COPD, but congestive heart failure, we can put this on them, and it's going to push the fluid to the bottom of the lungs if they're filling up with fluid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Which buys time, right?
Exactly. It buys a lot of time. And we don't use it that often because we're 5 minutes from the hospital, or we have advanced life support right there. And they're usually like, we'll pull up and say, all right, we're going to put this on now. So, but we have it and we're trained on it and we're able to use it if necessary. And there's been times when we have successfully used it. But it's not every agency does that. Their medical director either doesn't let them, or their leadership says, listen, we don't want to get involved in that. We're kind of cutting edge on that process. And we do yearly recurrencies and yearly training to make sure that our staff are able to do that, right?
Yeah. All right. Now I want to break down this. The next part is what I call the inside scoop. So this is like the stuff that people want to know, but maybe we don't ask these questions. I'm going to try and ask them for the audience here. And the first one is, what do you think people get wrong about operations, and specifically within an emergency services context? Like, what do you think people entirely get wrong?
Calling an ambulance gets you into the ER faster.
Oh, interesting.
I cannot tell you how many times somebody's like, oh, I'll go with you guys because I'll get seen faster. It's not the case. The triage, we give report to the triage nurse, and the triage nurse will determine, is this patient going to go into a bed right now and start treatment right now, or evaluation, or is like, all right, that can go sit in triage and wait.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just so that for us, outsiders, I guess, what should we make sure that we do? If something's happening, should we just go?
If something's happening,
I guess the situation is case by case, of course.
It is, but at the same degree, it isn't. If you think that something is off and it worries you enough that you're thinking about going to the hospital, I would say it's always prudent to call 911. We can't do what somebody is say, oh, can you just evaluate me? Well, we don't really evaluate people. We take their blood pressure, we take their vital signs, we listen to look through their medical history, listen to their complaints, and then we say, hey, okay, what hospital do you want to go to? At least in New Jersey, legally, EMTs can't say, okay, you don't need to go to the hospital. It's always, you should go to the hospital. So if you're calling us, it means you really, you're having what you feel to you is a life-threatening emergency, and you want somebody to evaluate, treat, and transport.
Got it.
If you're like kind of hedging, and I got to be careful how I say that, right, too, because during COVID, we saw so many people not go to the hospital and then pass away because they were afraid of getting COVID and they would have a heart attack or a stroke or something else. So what I always recommend is if you feel off, if you feel something's wrong, you don't feel right, call the professionals. We come right to your house. But don't think that you get seen faster because you came via ambulance. That's more of somebody who's like, oh, I know it's just the flu, but I need to go to the hospital to get some medication. The ambulance doesn't get you there faster.
You're not getting preferential treatment in the situation of, oh, you're going to go skip to the front of the line.
Correct.
But if it's something incredibly serious, you need to call and get somebody there stat. Okay. That's just good to know. I think that our medical care system is very confusing for even myself. I've been in it over 3 decades, right? So you're always trying to, I guess, hack the system, but that is not a way to hack the system, folks. Do not go that route. You're just going to cause headaches for these wonderful humans.
To that point, also something that I don't think people know, I don't have the exact states, and I should pull it up. There are only 11 states in the United States of America that EMS is considered an essential service.
Oh, interesting.
39 of the 50 states do not recognize EMS as an essential service. That means it's harder to get tax funding. It's harder to get grant funding. It's harder to get any type of federal or state or local dollars because we're not essential.
Wow. What we take for granted, huh?
And I'll just leave, for your listeners, just John Oliver did a great skit about that about a year ago. Look up John Oliver EMS, and he does a funny, in his typical John Oliver fashion, great skit about how EMS is not an essential service in most states.
That's mind-blowing to me because I think we all assume that it's just a part of what the resources that we have in our lives, but we can't just assume that, right? We have to make sure that we have that.
You can't imagine calling 911 and them saying, oh, the ambulance isn't coming. Like nobody would ever process that. You expect the ambulance to come, and it will. But that ambulance might be a private contractor. That might be a for-profit company. That might be a hospital system. It's not necessarily getting any tax dollars. So after that ride, oh, by the way, this is a $2,000 bill and you need to pay it. Oh, I can't afford it. Yeah, that's great. You're going into collections. Like that's the type of mindset that's out there in a lot of circumstances. We in Montclair, we don't put anyone in collections. We need the money, right? But we're not going to put somebody in collections over a medical transport bill.
Yeah. Wow. I'm learning a lot today. I feel like I'm having a life education talking to you. So I guess this transitions into the next question nicely, because the next question is, what do you think is the hardest part of operations within emergency services? Now, I would say this is maybe tough to say what's the hardest thing. So if you have like a top 3 list, I'll roll with that too.
Supply chain difficulties. Definitely one of the hardest things. It got pretty bad during COVID and it stayed bad. So defibrillator pads, we placed an order, I think it was like midsummer, and we finally got it in October. And just knowing it, staying on top of that, like, okay, we knowing that there's these delays, making sure we're ordering with more than enough lead time to make sure it gets to us. You can just Google ambulance chassis delays and find out that there's like a 2-year backlog to buy a new ambulance. Whereas before you'd go call a dealer and within that same year you'd have an ambulance. Now it's minimum 2 years, if not longer, because there's no vehicles to be had or no raw materials to build the box that's going to sit on the chassis, even if they have the chassis.
Wow. I think we've all heard or experienced the supply chain pinch that's happened since 2020, but that takes it to a different level. that really does.
We've all heard of the staffing problems too, right? Like, my organization, I like to pride ourselves in the fact that we're not having the staffing problems that we previously had. The previous chief before I, and the previous deputy chief before my deputy chief, we were working like 50, 60-hour weeks, sometimes mostly on the ambulance because there was no staff. They were able to hire about 7 people, and I hired an additional 7 people. And we got to a comfortable number where we, for the most part, are staffed comfortably. And I've got people actually fighting for more hours as opposed to like begging them to work, which is good and nice to have. But EMS as a whole is in a staffing crisis. You have in rural America, agencies are shutting because they don't have enough staff. There's not enough volunteers. There's not enough paid staff. There's not enough anything. And your trips to the hospital take longer because the hospitals have closed. So now you're going further for a hospital. Or when you get to the hospital because they're understaffed, you're sitting there waiting at the hospital longer. There's been some crazy, absurd times out in the West I've seen that are like 4 hours sitting at an ER waiting to transfer a patient. And now your service area has no ambulance and there's no backup. So just like we've all heard in every single business there is, right? Staffing problem. Our staffing problem is kind of at critical mass. We were in this situation before COVID. It's been this way before COVID. And it's just COVID took so many people out of our workforce that said, we're done. We're not doing this anymore. It's not worth risking our lives because people were like, oh, wait, we're at risk. I mean, New Jersey lost more EMTs than died on 9/11.
Oh my gosh, that's a huge, I mean, listen, I can only imagine the burnout too. That it's like, it's at a tipping point, right? If you're putting yourself at risk, by proxy, maybe your family at risk, and then you also are just experiencing burnout simultaneously. It's the trifecta for that is got to be, I don't even know how that could feel to be just straight up.
If and your listeners are about to find this out, right? But if the average American understood how crisis mode EMS is in nationwide, I've seen sign-on bonuses in New Jersey for paramedics at $30,000.
Whoa.
The desperation is real and they cannot fill these positions.
Wow. I'm like trying to comprehend that number straight up.
No, that's from
a signing bonus. Whoa.
And that's from a hospital system, right? So they have, I don't want to say unlimited money to burn, but they have, resources to burn and they can't staff. I'd say those are the top two. I think, I don't know if there's really a third that really strikes me as like one of the biggest challenges, because there's all like these different little crises that pop up and different challenges that pop up. But just knowing how crisis point everything is.
All right. If we haven't scared people off yet, if you're not scared yet, or you're interested in that signing bonus, if somebody were wanting to become an EMT, where should they start? Like today, you want to support your fellow, emergency service people. You want to become a part of it. Where do they begin?
So it depends on where you are in the country. And I'm going to speak specific to New Jersey. I'm going to get some heat from some people for this probably, but I believe volunteerism has a place in our field. And there's a lot of paid EMTs and paramedics who kind of crap on volunteers all the time. And I don't think that's a fair outlook, because there's many volunteer agencies that hold themselves accountable to the same standard as a paid employee. And I think that's the key. So if you're looking to start out, look and see if there's any volunteer agencies in your area. Most of them will help get you the training and pay for the training to become an EMT. And their ask is give us 2 years volunteering after you get the training. And I don't think that's a horrible ask. And I think, it provides needed help inside your own community or your neighboring community, right? Like I started in Nutley. I lived in Clifton. I lived in Clifton though. So, and they're neighbors for those who don't know the area, Clifton and Nutley. So I think that's your first step.
Truly, I know that I would not be able to do what you do. I know straight up that this is something that I would really struggle with. But it's interesting because it's like at the flip side, I know people that like yourself that they wake up for that thing, that this is the thing that drives them. And there's nothing else that really gets them that level of, gratification, I guess, than doing this kind of work. So it amazes me. And I bow down to all of you that are in this line of work. Seriously, I'm in awe. You all are the special ones.
We tell that to ourselves all the time, and that's the problem.
I will say, I think it's interesting too, because that was your journey as well, right? You started out volunteering, and then, obviously you've made this a career for yourself, and you've really invested yourself in this thing too. So I do think that is sound advice coming from somebody who's walked that path before. One thing to say, a tip of advice, another thing to have done it.
And hopefully, if any, I'm sure people in the EMS community, because I'll wind up sharing this on my social media, and next thing you know, they're going to have people breaking down the door saying, "What are you saying that for?" I also want to point out that to volunteers that may listen to this, right? Like, not all paid people are assholes. there is a lot of us out there that, as long as we all do the same job, as long as we're all held to the same standard and do the same job, that there should be no animosity between paid and volunteer.
And they can live together. They can live together harmoniously. That's the goal, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I want to wrap up with some personal questions, rapid fire questions, just to learn more about, the man behind the scenes, get to know more about you as a human. So I'm just going to shoot them at you and answer them as we go. And this is how we'll end this episode of Secret Ops. Okay. So to kick off, drum roll, I always feel like I have to do a drum roll. What morning rituals do you start your day with? We've established that we need coffee of the most acidity. But what other things do you need to start your day?
Random Spotify playlist while I'm driving to work.
How do you wind down at the end of the day? And I think this question is extra important in your case because of the stakes that you're navigating. How do you unpack that?
For me personally, it's either playing video games, or if I'm not in the mood for video games, it's smoking a cigar, sitting on the porch with my dog, reading a book. Very relaxed things. Going to a Jets game.
All of those good things. What book are you currently reading? That was the next one.
I'm in between books. I have to decide what I'm reading next. It honestly is probably going to be The Laws of Creativity just because I haven't had a chance to read it yet.
And for those who don't know, that's my husband's book that he just released. So, shameless plug.
It is a shameless plug, but I'm currently finishing up rereading G.I. Joe comics.
Ooh. What is your favorite quote? Like, if there was a quote that stuck with you over the years, what would that be?
General Patton once said, "Lead me, follow me, or get out of the way." And that one sticks with me a lot, because it's like, either lead me, show me what to do, and tell me, what we're going to do. Or if you're not going to do that, follow me, because I'm going to do it. And if you're not going to follow me, you're not going to lead me, just move, because I'm not stopping.
Yeah. I love that one. I'm going to take that one too. It's a good one.
Yeah.
In your life so far, what do you think is the most important lesson that you've learned?
There's been a lot. Trust my gut.
Last question. What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be either on a beach, relaxing on a beach, or like one of those like apartments that overlooks Bourbon Street, like right on Bourbon Street, and you're just on a veranda. I just want to be like there watching the party. Like, I want to be the chill, retired, relaxed, like smoking a cigar, wearing a Hawaiian shirt. I already smoked a cigar and wear the Hawaiian shirt. I just need to be retired, I guess.
James, I think I've seen a preview of that a couple of years ago. So I can see it happening. I can see you manifesting it.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to talk to me. I really hope that the listeners have gained a lot of knowledge from this conversation. I know that I've learned a ton. If people wanted to find you, where can they find or follow you?
So I'm going to plug Montclair EMS here, montclairems.org. If you want to follow up what we're doing, it's on Instagram as well, Montclair EMS, and Twitter is the same handle. You can email me at chief@montclairems.org, or check my LinkedIn out. It's simple, James Mazza. I'm willing to answer any questions you might have, things that maybe you might disagree with me on. Maybe you're in the field and you're going to yell at me about supporting volunteers or or whatever, right? I can't say enough about Montclair EMS and how much good we do in the community, but also how important support is, right? We are a nonprofit 501c3. We do not get tax dollars. We get a little bit of help from the town, but we don't get sustained tax dollars. So outside of billing people, it's all about donations. So, that's I will plug that, and maybe somebody can keep me honest and keep me writing on my blog for whatifhistory.com. It's an alternative history blog, stuff like what if Japan had invaded Hawaii after the Pearl Harbor attack, stuff like that. I just don't have enough time to write it, so somebody keep me honest on that.
All right, you've heard the request. Keep them honest. James, thank you so much for your time. Everybody who's listening who is in emergency medical services, thank you so much for all that you do on a day-to-day basis that's not seen. I think in the last 2 years, the appreciation for you has just been tenfold. And last but not least, thank you to the wonderful audience for listening to Secret Ops. Please follow us wherever you find your podcast and check us out at secret-ops.com. We'll see you next time.